Globalization and Indian society. 9.1 Concept of liberalization, that is the first topic. Globalization and privatization have become the buzzwords in the current economic scenario. The concepts of liberalization, globalization, and privatization are actually closely related to one another. This LPG phenomenon was first initiated in the Indian economy in 1990 when the Indian economy experienced a severe crisis. There was decline in the country's export earnings, national income, and industrial output. The government had to seek aid from IMF to resolve its debt problem. That is when government decided to introduce the new industrial policy NIP in 1991 to start liberalizing the Indian economy. Liberalization means elimination of state control over economic activities. It implies greater autonomy to the business enterprises in decision making and removal of government interference. It was believed that the market forces of demand and supply would automatically operate to bring about greater efficiency and the economy would recover. This was to be done internally by introducing reforms in the real and financial sectors of the economy and externally by relaxing state control on foreign investments and trade. With the NIP 1991, the Indian government aimed at integrating the country's economy with the world economy, improving the efficiency and productivity of the public sector. For attaining the objective, existing government regulations and restrictions on industry were removed. The major aspects of liberalizations in India were: first, abolition of licensing. NIP 1991 abolished licensing for most industries except 6 industries of strategic significance. They include alcohol, cigarette, industrial explosives, defense products, drugs, and pharmaceuticals, hazardous chemicals, and certain other reserved and the public sector. This would encourage setting up of new industries and shift focus to productive activities. Second, liberalization of foreign investment. While earlier prior approval was required by foreign companies, now automatic approvals were given for foreign direct investment (FDI) to follow into the country. A list of high priority and investment intensive industries were delicensed and could invite up to 100% FDI, including sectors such as hotel, tourism, infrastructure, software development, etc. Use of foreign brand name or trademark was permitted for sales of goods. Third, relaxation of location restrictions. There was no required anymore for obtaining approval from the central government for setting up industries anywhere in the country except those specified under compulsory licensing or in cities with population exceeding 1 million. Polluting industries were required to be located 25 kilometers away from the city. Peripheries if the city population was greater than 1 million. Fourth, liberalization of foreign technology imports. In projects where imported capital goods are required, automatic license would be given for foreign technology imports up to $2 million. No permissions would be required for hiring foreign technicians and foreign testing of indigenously developed technologies. Fifth, phased manufacturing programs. Under PMP, any enterprise had to progressively substitute imported inputs, components with domestically produced inputs under local content policy. However, NIP 1991 abolished PMP for all industrial enterprises. Foreign Investment Promotion Board (FIBP) was set up to speed up approval for foreign investment proposals. Sixth, public sector reforms. Greater autonomy was given to the PSUs, public sector units, through the MOUS Memorandum of Understanding, restricting interference of the government officials and allowing the managements greater freedom in decision making. Seventh, MRTP Act. The Industrial Policy 1991 restructured the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Acts. Regulation relating to concentration of economic power, pre-entry restrictions for setting up new enterprises, expansion of existing businesses, mergers and acquisitions, etc. have been abolished. So we complete 9.1, that is concept of liberalization. We go on to 9.2, that is concept of privatization. Privatization is closely associated with the phenomena of globalization and liberalization. Privatization is the transfer of control of ownership of economic resources from the public sector to the private sector. It means a decline in the role of the public sector as there is a shift in the property rights from the state to private ownership. The public sector had been experiencing various problems since planning, such as low efficiency and profitability, mounting losses, excessive political interference, lack of autonomy, labor problems, and delays in completion of projects. Hence, to remedy this situation, with introduction of NIP 1991, privatization was also initiated into Indian economy. Another term for privatization is disinvestment. The objectives of disinvestment were to raise resources through sale of PSUs to be directed towards social welfare expenditures, raising efficiency of PSUs through increased competition, increasing consumer satisfaction with better quality goods and services, upgrading technology, and most importantly, removing political interference. The main aspects of privatization in India are as follows. First one, autonomy to public sector. Greater autonomy was granted to 9 PSUs referred to as Navratnas, that is ONGC, HPCL, BPCL, VSNL and BHEL, to take their own decisions. Second one, de-reservation of public sector. The number of industries reserved for the public sectors were reduced in a phased manner for 17 to 8 and then to only 3, including railways, atomic energy, specified minerals. This has opened more areas of investment for the private sector and increased competition for the public sector, forcing greater accountability and efficiency. Third, disinvestment policies. Till 1999 to 2000, disinvestment was done basically through sale of minority shares, but since then the government has undertaken strategic sale of its equity to the private sector, handing over complete management control, such as in the case of BSNL and BALCO, etc. So we complete second concept, that is privatization. Now we go on to third, that is 9.3, concept of globalization. Globalization was essentially means integration of the national economy with the world economy. It implies a free flow of information, ideas, technology, goods and services, capital, and even people across different countries and societies. It increases connectivity between different markets in form of trade, investments, and cultural exchanges. The concept of globalization has been explained by the IMF, International Monetary Fund, as the growing economic interdependence of countries worldwide through increasing volume and varieties of cross-border transactions in goods and services, and of international capital flows, and also through the more rapid and widespread diffusion of technology. The phenomenon of globalization caught momentum in India in 1990s with reform in all sectors of the economy. The main elements of globalization were: first, to open the domestic markets for inflow of foreign goods. India reduced custom duties on imports. The general customs duty on most goods was reduced to only 10%, and import licensing was has been most almost abolished. Tariff barriers have been slashed significantly to encourage trade volume to rise in keeping with the World Trade Organization (WTO) order under GATT General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. Second, the amount of foreign capital in a country is a good indicator of globalization and growth. The FDI policy of the GOI encouraged the inflow of fresh foreign capital by allowing 100% foreign equity in certain projects under the automatic route. NRIs and OCBs, overseas corporate bodies, may invest up to 100% capital with repatriability in high priority industry. MNCs and TNCs were encouraged to establish themselves in Indian markets and were given a level playing field to compete with Indian enterprises. Third, Foreign Exchange Regulation Act (FERA) was liberalized in 1993 and later Foreign Exchange Management Act (FEMA) 1999 was passed to enable foreign currency transactions. Fourth, India signed many agreements with the WTO, affirming its commitment to liberalize trade such as TRIPs, trade related intellectual property rights, TRIMS, trade related investment measures, and AOA, agreement on agriculture. So we complete the third part, that is concept of. So now we move on to 9.3, when that is impact of globalization. These are the parts of globalization. So advantage of globalization. First, there is a decline in number of people living below poverty line in developing countries due to increased investments, trade, and rising employment opportunities. Second, there is an improvement in various economic indicators of the LDCs, less developed countries such as employment, life expectancy, literacy rates, per capita consumption, etc. Third, free flow of capital and technology enables developing countries to speed up the process of industrialization and lay the path for faster economic progress. Fourth, products of superior quality are available in the market due to increased competition, efficiency, and productivity of the businesses, and this leads to the increased consumer satisfaction. Fifth, free flow of finance enable the banking and financial institutions in the country to fulfill financial requirements through internet and electronic transfers easily and help businesses to flourish. Sixth, MNCs bring with them foreign capital, technology, know-how, machines, technical and managerial skills, which can be used for the development of the host nation. Disadvantages of globalization. First, domestic companies are unable to withstand competitions from efficient MNCs, which have flooded Indian markets since their liberalized entry. It may lead to shutdown of operations, pink slips, and downsizing. Moreover, skilled and efficient labor get absorbed by these MNCs that offer higher pay and incentives, leaving unskilled labor for employment in the domestic industries. Thus, there may be unemployment and underemployment. Second, payment of dividends, royalties, and repatriation has in fact led to a rise in outflow of foreign capital. Third, with increased dependence on foreign technology, development of indigenous technology has taken a backseat and domestic R&D development has suffered. Fourth, globalization possesses certain risks for any country in the form of business cycles, fluctuations in international prices, specialization in few exportables, and so on. Sixth, Fifth, it increases the disparities in the incomes of the rich and poor, developed nations and LDCs. It leads commercial imperialism as the richer nations tend to exploit the resources of the poor nations. Sixth, globalization leads to fusion of cultures and intermingling of societies to such an extent that there may be a loss of identities and traditional values. It gives rise to mindless aping of Western lifestyles and mannerisms, however ill suited they may be. Seventh, it leads to overcrowding of cities and puts pressure on the amenities and facilities available in urban areas. So we complete this part, advantages and disadvantages of globalization. So there's this small box and there are 3 questions to check your progress. So the first question is, if you can note down, you can. The first question is, explain the concept of liberalization. Second question is, briefly explain the meaning of privatization. Third question is, what is globalization? Bring out the advantages and disadvantages of globalization. These 3 are the questions. We continue to the fourth part, growth of information technology and communication. One of the factors that triggered globalization was the IT revolution, and since reforms there has been no turning back. Use of information technology has taken over manufacturing and service sectors all over the world. It has provided employment to the millions of people in tertiary sector. Outsourcing and BPOs have been responsible for a rapid rise in the annual domestic product of the country. In 2011, annual revenues from the BPO sector is estimated to have aggregated revenues of over 88 billion US dollars. Bengaluru, also known as India's Silicon Valley, continues to be home to several of India's flourishing IT companies, including Infosys and Wipro. The top 7 cities that account for almost 90% of the exports in the IT sector are Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, Mumbai, Pune, Delhi, and Kolkata. Because of these companies in India is fast gaining recognition as a knowledge economy. This sector is responsible for generating direct employment to the tune of 2.3 million in 2009 and 2010, and is estimated to reach nearly 2.5 million by the end of the year 2010 and 2019. The communication sector or the telecom industry is growing at a dizzying pace. Use of internet, global positioning system, telephones, mobile phone, fax, video conferencing has brought all the countries closer and turned the world into a global village. India had the 4th largest number of internet users of around 100 million in 2010. There were as many as 826.93 million total wireless subscribers in country by the end of April 2019. It is projected that wireless communication will continue to fuel growth in the telecom sector, increasing the subscription base to 9.159 billion by 2013. Among leading mobile operators in India are Bharti Telecom, followed by Reliance, Vodafone, Idea, and then the state-owned BSNL. So now we move on to 5th part of the lesson, that is impact of it and communication. The positive impact are: first, the IT sector has truly achieved global integration through increased connectivity. It has cut across linguistics and geographical barriers, making it possible for persons in distant nations to easily communicate with one another. Second, it has enabled intermingling of cultures, exchange of opinions and ideas, thereby creating strong bonds and reducing prejudices. Third, uses of wireless phones and internet has made communication speedier, environment friendly, as it is paper free and cheaper. Video conferencing makes it possible for people, however far apart, to engage in direct interaction. This has enabled people to work from home, meetings to take place among many individuals even if they are in different parts of the world, etc. Fourth, emails can be checked on phone, financial transactions can be carried out over phone, social networking sites are linked to phone to keep oneself updated with the events in lives of our friends and relatives. All this has made communication devices an indispensable part of our lives. Fifth, the benefits of information technology and communication facilities have split into various areas of business, healthcare, defense, environment, and so on. The quick access to information has removed time lags in decision making, increased productivity, and cut cost effectively. It has made work less strenuous and salaries more lucrative. Sixth, information made technology had made it possible to buy and sell anytime from any place and have the goods delivered at one's doorstep. Electronically, markets can operate daily and night because of the internet. Seventh, a lot of new jobs have been created, especially in the IT sector. For example, software programmers, hardware developers, system analysts, web designers, and so on. 8th, remote sensing satellites are used for various purposes such as land use mapping, drought and flood mapping, forest cover mapping, etc., to study the impact of industrial activities, mining on environment. Negative impact. Increased computerization has led to overmanning and with efforts at cost cutting to streamline business processes. A lot of jobs have been more redundant. This has aggravated the unemployment problem. Second, mobile phones have made people accessible at all times, encroaching into their personal time with friends and family. Third, technology is dynamic and keeps changing on daily basis, which makes it important for professionals in this field to upgrade their skills and knowledge regularly. Otherwise, they face the risk of losing their jobs, hence, there is no job security. Fourth, there are new forms of offenses such as cybercrime and hacking, which threaten to compromise the privacy of individuals. Fifth, exposure to Western influences have led to certain cultures being imbibed and their lifestyles, language, dress, and behavior being imitated. However, while some changes may be positive, this also has brought in consumerism and reckless spending habits, which are corroding the traditional values. Now we move on to 9.6, that is impact of globalization on industry. The positive effects of globalization on industry can be traced since the new industrial policy in 1999. Positive effects. First, delicensing, removal of government restrictions on industries, and liberalization of foreign investment have reduced the time and money spent in formal procedures for obtaining approvals from the government. This has shifted the focus of enterprises to the actual business of production, thus lowering project costs. Second, exports have increased, so also has the volume of trade. Policies in areas of foreign investments have attracted inflow of foreign capital, especially in sectors like electrical equipments, services, and telecommunication. Fourth, Indian industries and financial institutions have undertaken investments abroad. Several Indian companies have entered into joint ventures with foreign companies. They are becoming internationally competitive. Fifth, India is increasing its export orientation through setting up of SEZs, special economic zones, and they are making their international presence felt through mergers and acquisitions. Industrial labor has become more efficient and skilled due to increased competition and inflow of foreign knowledge. There is a rise in industrial productivity, which is reflected in higher industrial wages. Instances of industrial sickness have gone down. 7. The goods produced by Indian industries in this competitive scenario, sold at competitive prices, give higher levels of satisfaction to the Indian consumers as they are of superior quality. 8th, the small scale sector is growing more robust with preferential loans, microfinance, and the other forms of credits being made available. Some SSEs have grown into medium scale operations. Negative effects. First, certain sectors that were already well established when open to foreign investment led to exploitation of their resources by dominating MNCs and stifle their own R&D efforts. Second, use of foreign technology may not be adaptable to Indian conditions. Sometimes MNCs deliberately use less sophisticated technology in their subsidiaries. Third, there is excessive competition in the market that puts too much pressure on domestic companies to raise productivity, improve product quality, etc. Fourth, rising urban industrial wages are much higher than rural wages, which leads to disparity in incomes. Fifth, there is uncontrolled growth of consumerism and the problem of plenty as a consumer has lot of choice. Businesses are solely motivated by private profits. Globalization has in fact raised capital intensity in production, and this has affected employment adversely as labor has been replaced by machine. Sixth, globalization has exposed domestic firms to risks such as fluctuations in prices, instability of profits, and uncertainties of demand and supply. So we end the topic that is impact of globalization on industry. Now we move on to 9.7, that is effect of globalization on employment. The effects of globalization on employment can be analyzed based on the NSSO, National Sample Survey Organization data. The employment current daily status growth accelerated between 1999 to 2000 and 2004 to 2005 as compared to the previous period of 1993 to 1994 to 1999 to 2000. During 1999 to 2000 to 2004 to 5, about 47 million work opportunities were created, and as compared to 24 million during the period 1993 to 94 to 1999 to 2000. Employment growth accelerated from 9.25% per annum during 1993 to 1994 to 1999 to 2000 to 2.62% per annum during 1999 to 2000 to 2004 to 2005. However, a higher labor force growth of 2.84% per annum during 1999-2000 to 2004 and 5, which exceeded the growth into workforce of 2.62% per annum, resulted in an increase in unemployment rate from 7.3% in 1999-2000 to 8.3% in 2004 to 5. In recent years, the quality of employment created has also been a matter of concern as the organized sector employment been declining. Moreover, the share of regular workforce in total employment was low. This decline is attributed primarily to a decline in employment in PSUs. During 1999-2000 to 2004-5, most of the growth of 4.7% per annum in industrial and tertiary employment was in unorganized sector. There has been a clear shift in workforce from organized sectors to a casual and informal sectors as liberalization has caused informalization of labor. At present, the main challenges for the policymakers are to target a rapid growth of employment creation and also improve the quality of employment generated by strengthening the organized sector. Negative impact. First, the organized sectors have become profit driven, and there is a lot of emphasis on cost cutting and have therefore gone in for downsizing policy. Labor in unorganized sector is not protected, so they have no job security, provident fund, medical facilities, or paid leave, and suffer due to low wages. Globalization has caused a shift of labor from the organized to the unorganized sector. Second, even large firms like Bajaj Auto and Tata Steel have succumbed to pressure and have chosen automation and computerization of processes over securing jobs of their employees. Excess labor has been retrenched by offering VRS, Voluntary Retirement Scheme, and CRS, Compulsory Retirement Scheme. According to a report of National Commission of Labour 2002, indirect compulsion pressure tactics have been used to compel employees to resign under VRS. Third, with disinvestment of some public sector units, employment in these sectors have reduced. The most affected sectors are manufacturing, construction, electricity, gas, and water supply. The level of employment in the small scale sector has remained stagnant and discouraging. FDI influenced several sectors have wiped out the business of many small and medium sized enterprises, forcing them into closure. Fourth, MNCs have exported jobs from developed countries to developing countries through foreign investments. Moreover, they offer higher pay they offer higher pay than what is offered by employers of local enterprises, adding to the inequalities in income. Fifth, through trade liberalization, the government has actually encouraged substitution of domestic goods by import, which has reduced the market size for goods manufactured by domestic labor, bringing down their wages and putting their jobs in danger. Sixth, trade unions have become weaker in negotiating better pay and security for workers, as only efficient labor is absorbed by the profit driven enterprises. To save workers from losing jobs, they were compelled to accept cuts in salaries, freezing of dearness allowance, and other benefits, and eventually reduction in labor force. Positive impact. First, the employment in the services sector has increased from 20% in 1991 to over 30% in 2010. The reason behind this creation of new jobs in the IT and communication sectors, jobs in call centers, BPOs, and medical transcription, as well as other service sectors such as banking, insurance, airlines, have buoyed employment. Foreign companies from different sectors like banking and finance have come to India to outsource their work, creating jobs in accounting, mortgage, collections, and marketing, etc. Second, other sectors where job opportunities have multiplied are biotechnology, healthcare, especially with chains of private hospitals being set up, medical research centers, food retailing, with shopping malls cropping up at every nook and corner of the cities and towns. Third, in the field of education, there is a demand of trained professionals as international schools and colleges are poised to enter India on a wider scale. Fourth, MNCs generate employment for the skilled workforce, especially in urban areas. It motivates labor to pick up various skills through training. Fifth, there is an increase in contractual and casual employment due to globalization since employers can't afford to have large workforce on a regular basis. Female participation in workforce has actually improved, especially in the casual informal sectors, affording low wage or flexible employment, and export oriented, low technology, high labor industries such as garments, electronics, etc. There has been an increase in women's employment. Now we move on to 9.8 concept and impact of migration. Globalization has definitely shown an increased trend of migration, especially from the developing to the developed countries of the world. Migration is basically a movement of people from one place, that is origin, to another, that is destination. It can be local, regional, where people move within the borders of a nation, or even international, which involves crossing the borders. Generally, migration occurs in order to access better opportunities in work, education, or to achieve better standard of living. With the relaxation of restrictions on trade and capital movements, movement of labor was also liberalized and explains the increase in migration. However, in recent years, due to increased FDI inflow and job creation by subsidiaries of established MNCs, there has been a check on migration levels from developing countries. These nations are characterized by surplus pauper labor, which if not absorbed in the domestic job markets, are willing to migrate to developed nations having labor shortages. Such countries ready to receive immigrant labor are called host nations. Host nations or receiving nations, and countries from which immigrant labor move out are called sending nations or countries of origin. For example, when an Indian student goes to Australia for higher studies or to find a job, he is an immigrant in Australia, but for India, he is an emigrant. The causative factors of migration could be economic, social, environmental, or political. Instances of rural to urban migration or international migrations are generally out of economic motivation, such as to find better job prospects, avail of better civic amenities, or raise one's standard of living. Social factors comprise of marriage, moving closer to one's relatives, etc. If a place is prone to environmental hazards or calamities such as earthquakes or floods, it may encourage people to migrate to more safer locales. Political instability of any kind, like rioting, acts of terrorism, may create panic and fear for one's life, forcing people to move. These days, people also travel afar to seek better or cheaper medical treatment. In recent times, a lot of nations like US and UK have taken a narrow stance by introducing several measures to control in migration. They have imposed restrictions on holding of visas and citizens by the immigrants. Impact of migration on host nations. First, immigrants may find it difficult to adapt to the environmental and social conditions of the host nation. Very often, they experience homesickness as the food, culture, language, mannerisms, weather, conditions may all differ. Adapting to many differences creates stress and other psychological problems such as loneliness and withdrawal. Second, sometimes immigrants face discrimination, especially if they belong to a different race. They are perceived with prejudice and not treated as equals by the natives, which makes them feel like outsiders and insecure. Third, it has been observed of a large proportion of immigrants from developing countries that they end up performing many menial tasks and lowly jobs, which draws much lower income than the natives in developed countries. Fourth, women participation in immigrant labor force has also increased, especially because when women are willing to take up slow paid jobs abroad such as maids, domestic workers, cleaning women, nannies, etc. Fifth, migration leads to fusion of cultures. The natives may find these influences threatening to their identity and resist mingling freely with the immigrant population. The immigrants tend to stick together in an expression of solidarity and form ghettos. Sixth, immigrant labor contributes to the growth of host nation to which they provide their services. This is because they earn, spend, save, and invest in the host nation, which adds to the economic activities there. The fact remains that the host nation gets gain out of the immigrant labor without having contributed towards the development of these human resources. Increase in the population of host nations put pressure on the infrastructure and facilities available. It leads to the congestion and a rise in various social problems. Impact of migration on countries of origin. First, most of the immigrant laborers are persons of specialized knowledge like doctors, engineers, research scholars, and lately from the field of IT. These individuals are educated and well trained in the sending nations have invested, but their outmigration, which is labeled brain drain, benefits the host nation. Second, the countries of origin experience some gains as the remittances of immigrant labor adds to their gross national product and adding to their foreign exchange reserves. Third, remittances sent back to families in the sending nations raises the standard of living and improve the lifestyle. It increases the choice of goods that can be purchased but also leads to consumerism. Fourth, continuous inflow of large amount of remittances creates a sense of dependency in the sending nation. It reduces reliability on domestic resources or goods and makes the country less than self-sufficient. In the event of severe ties between the host and sending nation, a fall in trade and migration could affect the economy of the sending nation adversely. 7th, emigrants abroad tend to form organizations and associations which rush aid to their native lands during calamities and disasters. They may also fund projects and thus increase the pace of investment of growth. Now we move on to 9.9 Effect of Globalization on Agriculture. The first topic is India and AOA. The study of effects of globalization would be incomplete without considering its impact on the most important sector of the economy. The agriculture sector is known to be the backbone of Indian economy, with an employment of 70% of the population in various agriculture, horticultural and allied activities. Its contribution to the gross domestic product, however, has been declining steadily over the past decades due to low productivity. Currently, it contributes 18% to the GDP and 10% to the export earnings of India. With a view to move forward towards liberalizing the agricultural sector and promoting free and fair trade, India, a member of the nation of the World Trade Organization, signed the Uruguay Round Agreement on 1st January 1995. The Agreement on Agriculture of the WTO was the first multilateral agreement meant to curb unfair practices in agricultural trade and set off processes of reforms in the agricultural sector. It contained the following broad areas. First, tariff reduction. Previously, trade in agriculture was restricted by quotas, import and export licensing, and other non-tariff barriers. The AOA required that all non-tariff barriers be replaced by a single tariff rate called bound tariff rate, and that existing tariffs be reduced in a phased manner over a stipulated period of time. Developing countries include India were expected to reduce bound tariffs by 24%, minimum of 10% for each commodity over a period of 10 years. Second, market access. To avoid the adverse effect of tariffs on certain special products, importing countries have given a current access commitment by establishing a tariff quota up to which imports are allowed at a lower rate and above which higher tariffs are charged. Under minimum access commitment, countries had to import a minimum quantity of their most restricted product, that is, in case of product with marginally low or no imports, countries had to impose tariff quota imports equal to 3% of domestic consumption, which would increase to 5% by 2000. Third, export subsidies. They are special incentives given to the exporters to encourage sales of export abroad, allowing them to charge competitive or lower price in the world market. However, this created distortions in international trade and hence AOA prohibits export subsidies. Member nations were expected to reduce them, while developed countries were supposed to cut the value of export subsidies by 36% over 6 years. Developing countries were to reduce them by 24% over 10 years. LDCs were exempted. Fourth, domestic support subsidies. Domestic support through subsidies and other measures were meant to push imports out of the market and also enable domestic exporters to compete in the world market. WTO measured this support as AMS, aggregate measurement of support. Domestic support is categorized in the form of red box, amber box, green box, and blue box subsidies. Red box subsidies are banned, whereas amber box subsidies are not banned but actionable. These subsidies were believed to be the most distortive in international trade, having adverse effects on trade interests of others. Green box subsidies in the form of assistance to research activities, disadvantaged regions, or non-discriminating subsidy, and blue box subsidies in the form of direct payment to farmers required to limit their productions were permitted and non-actionable. The blue box subsidies were not allowed to be more than 5% for developed countries and 10% for developing countries. 9.9.2 Impact of globalization on agriculture and current trends. First, India is the second largest producer of food in the world. However, Indian agriculture has shown a slow average annual growth rate. It was 3.1% during the decade 1980 to 1990, prior to liberalization of the economy, but since then the annual growth rates have declined consistently relative to annual growth rate of the population. Several factors were responsible for this fall in growth rate: lack of credit, inadequate irrigation cover, and indebtedness, continuing use of obsolete technology, improper use of inputs, and decline in the public investment. The decline in overall growth of employment during 1993-94 to 2004-05 was largely due to fall in creation of employment opportunities in agriculture. With increase in knowledge and entry of many foreign firms in the non-agricultural sectors, the labor has shifted to manufacturing the services sector. The National Sample Survey Organization, that is NSSO, report on employment and unemployment situation in India 2009-10 on the basis of usually working persons in the principal status and subsidiary status for every 1,000 people employed in rural and urban India. 679 and 75 people are employed in the agricultural sector, 241 and 683 in services sector, and 80 and 242 in the industrial sector respectively. Third, with globalization, farmers were encouraged to shift from traditional crops to export-oriented cash crops such as cotton and tobacco. But such crops needed far more inputs in terms of fertilizers, pesticides, and water. The growth in yields of principal crops, notably rice and wheat, have also decelerated. Fourth, there has been a decline in overall area under food grains during 2011-12. The area coverage under food grains during 2011-12 stood at 1254.92 lakh compared to 1267.65 lakh last year. The lower area under food grains has been due to shortfall in the area under Jawar in Maharashtra, Rajasthan and Gujarat, Bajra in Maharashtra, Gujarat and Haryana, and in pulses in Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh and Rajasthan. Fifth, appropriate use of agricultural equipment suited to the crops and the region of cultivation led to the efficient utilization of farm inputs, making farming financially viable and profitable. Though there has been considerable progress in farm mechanization, its spread across the country still remains uneven. Most significant supply side constraint to the agricultural production is irrigation coverage that still extends to only about 40% of net sown area. There has been slowdown in the growth rate of direct demand for good grain consumption on account of several factors, and there is a need to address these challenges on the agricultural sector through coordinated efforts directed at improving farm production and productivity through high value crops, developing rural infrastructure, renewing thrust on the irrigation sector, strengthening market infrastructure, and supporting investment in R&D with due emphasis on environmental concerns. 9.9.3 Agrarian Crisis. The Structural Adjustment Program (SAP) of liberalizing the Indian economy was undertaken in 1991 as per the directives of International Monetary Fund and the World Trade Organization. Major reforms were introduced in the real and financial sectors of the economy with a view to increase the efficiency and profitability. Trade was also liberalized. The import and custom duties of many products were drastically reduced or abolished completely. Removal of all restriction on imports led to a steep fall in their domestic prices, rendering them unprofitable for production. The government started disinvesting in agriculture and the industrial sector, allowing the private sector to take over. The government reduced different types of subsidies to agriculture, which increased the production cost of cultivation. This led to the agrarian crisis as it has an adverse impact on the agricultural sector. First, several million hectares of food growing land were converted to exportable crops, leading to fall in food grains output. India, being self-sufficient, started exporting wheat and rice, but the rate of growth of the GDP in agriculture and allied sectors were just 1% per annum during the year 2002 to 2005. As a result, per capita availability of food grains decreased. The growth rate of population became higher than that of food grains. Moreover, trade liberalization with a thrust on exports has been inconducive to Indian markets, causing a steep fall in prices of farm goods. As prices fell for Indian producers of export crops, their access to low-cost credits was also reduced under financial sector reforms. Second, lending facilities and concessions of banks were removed during the post-reform period, and this accelerated the crisis in agriculture. Farmers were unable to pay back loans with higher interest and also resorted to borrowing from unorganized elements such as money lenders, thus falling into debt trap. Farmers did not benefit even with contract farming, and their exposure to steeply falling global food prices plunged them into spiraling farm debt, pushing them to commit suicide. Third, the restructuring of the public distribution system through the creation of two groups below poverty line (BPL) and above poverty line (APL) continuously increased their prices to ration shops, affecting the availability of food grains to the poor at subsidized rates. As a result, even the poor people did not buy the subsidized food grains, and it got accumulated in the godowns to be spoiled or sold in the open market. Fourth, the increased grain exports have been at the cost of hunger and starvation, as millions of rural laborers and farmers have suffered job loss and income decline. Rising unemployment, rising input and credit costs for farmers, and exposures to global price declines are responsible for the low absorption of food grains in India. Increase in the instance of farmers' suicide has been a major fallout of stagnation in agriculture. Monopolization of HYV seeds Shift in farming from chemical farming to organic farming. Global competition is killing our farmers literally, since agriculture is not drawing remunerative income. Farmers have become desperate, turning to suicide as an escape from the debt trap. More than 5,000 indebted cotton farmers have committed suicide in Andhra Pradesh since 1998, and Maharashtra Vidarbha are not far behind in numbers. This is a grave issue which requires urgent and continuing attention of the government and society. Sixth, contract farming has led to a direct onslaught on peasant land and water resource by corporates. Restrictions on land ownership by non-cultivators have been removed and ceilings on land holding rolled back in many states to aid large business corporations in purchase of agricultural land. Farmers are giving up land to solve their debt crisis but are unable to overcome their food problems. Unemployment in the agricultural sector has in fact increased during the reform period. 8. Under the Special Economic Zones Act of 2005, land has been taken over by the government for commercial and industrial purposes. Most of the acquired land is fertile for non-agricultural purposes. Corporate bigwigs like Reliance Tata have faced public protests over their acquisition of land, such as Nandigram agitation in West Bengal. SEZ were introduced to promote export and industrial growth in line with globalization, but have resulted in exploitation of farmers, taking away their means of livelihood and directing land towards businesses and manufacture. Now we go on to 9.10, that is growth of corporate farming. Contract farming and corporate farming have been encouraged by the government as possible solution to problems of Indian agriculture. The small-sized, fragmented, uneconomic land holdings and lack of competitiveness of agricultural produce are main reasons for eroding profitability of the agricultural sector. State governments across the different states such as Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, West Bengal and many more are amending laws to encourage the practice of corporate farming. Prime agricultural land and wastelands are being purchased or leased in by corporate houses to undertake agribusiness ranging from seed supply, agri-chemical to storage, transport and retail sales. The large corporate, primarily motivated by profits, invest huge amount of funds towards research and modernization of agriculture, and with complete control over the land holdings are able to maximize produce for both sale in the open markets as well as their own retail food processing. Reliance Fresh, Tata Agri-Chemicals, Sterling Agro, McDonald's, Hindustan Lever are only a few examples of entry of private sector into primary sector. The problem of Indian farmer is that the farmland should be owned by independent farmer and input costs like farm machinery, crop insurance, fertilizers, irrigation, pesticides, fuel and seeds should be borne by the corporate. But corporate farming at present is bringing back feudalism as corporate farmers are working as contractual laborers of the corporate that have bought their lands and employed them. The small farmers, now landless, continue to be plagued by problems of hunger and debt. Corporate farming can be economically and socially beneficial if it gets the marginal farmer a remunerative price. It adds to the export capacity of the country by discovering international market for fresh produce, fruits, vegetables and processed primary goods of consumption, contributing thus to the growth in agriculture. Credit requirement is not a constraint for the big corporates as they have huge funds at their disposal as well as ample support of financial institutions and banks. They can undertake large-scale investments and necessary for marketing from packaging to warehousing to transportation of primary goods. There is a huge demand for organic foods among consumers today, and such cultivation is being taken up by the businesses to cater to changing preferences. However, corporate farming has its fair share of pitfalls which can reverse trend of growth and increase social injustice. Since the corporates continue to operate on the motive of profits, they will not be too concerned with the welfare of the farmers. Production will become completely market oriented and substituting subsistence cropping by commercial cultivation. More and more of the farm output produced will be for the export basket rather than satisfying domestic needs of consumption. It is already observed that there is an increasing trend of casualization of labor, causing a shift in employment from agricultural sector to the urban, informal and service sectors. Concrete steps need to be taken by policymakers to ensure that farmer status in the country doesn't worsen. So we end the lesson. This is the summary of the lesson. The developments over the last year in major economies of the world have not been encouraging. The financial crisis in USA as well as the ongoing European sovereign debt crisis has raised questions about the globalized environment in the world and whether most nations would be exposed to more instability in the future. India has achieved faster growth from the 1980s compared to its past, but that growth brought about globalization has been at a cost, as indicated by worsening of employment, agriculture, small scale, and others in priority sector.